The rehearsal dinner venue shimmered, all soft lighting and polished silver. I smoothed down my dress, a deep sapphire I'd chosen specifically to complement Jalen's eyes. A flutter of anxiety, the usual pre-wedding jitters, tickled my stomach. Then I saw it. My name, penned elegantly on a place card at a table tucked away in the far corner, miles from the head table where Jalen, Meredith, and her family were already seated. "Excuse me," I said to a young woman arranging floral centerpieces. "Is this seating chart correct?" She glanced at the card, then back at me with a polite, vacant smile. "Yes, ma'am. Everything's as the bride requested." The bride, my son's bride. I walked to the designated table, a knot tightening in my chest. It was a beautiful table, undeniably, adorned with the same elegant lilies and flickering candles as the others. But its location spoke volumes. It was the Siberia of wedding tables, reserved for the distant relatives and plus ones nobody quite knew what to do with. "This is unexpected," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. An older gentleman, already seated, looked up from his phone. "Indeed," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Seems there's been a bit of a mix-up. My wife and I should be closer to the front, given our history with Meredith's family." He gestured vaguely toward the head table. "But these things happen." He shrugged, seemingly unfazed. I forced a smile. "I'm sure it's just an oversight." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the past few months, I'd felt myself slowly being edged out of the wedding planning process. Meredith had been polite, of course, even charming at times. But her decisions, her subtle suggestions, all pointed towards one thing: my absence. "Beautiful venue, isn't it?" I asked the gentleman, attempting to make conversation, to distract myself from the stinging realization. "Yes, quite lovely," he replied, his attention already drifting back to his phone. I took my seat, the plush velvet doing little to cushion the blow. The room buzzed with laughter and excited chatter, but I felt a chilling isolation creeping in. Jalen hadn't even noticed my arrival. He was engrossed in conversation with Julian, Meredith's fiancé, both of them radiating that pre-wedding glow. I watched them, my heart aching with a complex mixture of love and a growing sense of betrayal. Had I done something wrong? Had I unknowingly offended Meredith or her family? The waiters began serving the first course, a delicate lobster bisque. I picked at mine, the exquisite flavor lost on my numb palate. Across the room, toasts were being made. Meredith's father, a boisterous man with a booming voice, regaled the guests with anecdotes about her childhood, painting a picture of a beloved daughter showered with affection and opportunity. Not a single mention of Jalen's upbringing, of the sacrifices I'd made to ensure he had those same opportunities. I excused myself, needing a moment to breathe, to escape the suffocating feeling of invisibility. I stepped out onto a small balcony overlooking the city lights, the cool night air welcome balm on my burning cheeks. Looking out at the sprawling cityscape, I thought back to the years I'd poured into raising Jalen, the late nights studying with him, the endless hours working to provide for him. I had always put him first, always believed that family was everything. And now, on the eve of his wedding, I felt like an outsider, a forgotten piece of the past. As I stood there, the city lights blurring through my tears, A strange sense of calm washed over me. It was a quiet resolve, a hardening of my heart against the hurt and disappointment. I wiped my eyes, a faint smile playing on my lips. They might think they could erase me, diminish my role in Jalen's life, but they were wrong, very wrong. I had something they didn't know about, something that gave me a power they couldn't imagine. Back inside, the party was in full swing. I returned to my isolated table, no longer feeling the sting of exclusion. Instead, a sense of purpose, a quiet anticipation, filled me. I watched Jalen laughing with his new family, oblivious to the shift that had occurred within me. He raised his glass in a toast, his eyes shining with happiness. I raised mine in return, a silent toast to myself, to the future I was about to create, the future they couldn't control, the future where I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, not in the way they expected, but in a way that would truly matter. The lobster bisque suddenly tasted much better. I finished the last spoonful, a renewed sense of appetite stirring within me. It wasn't just for the soup. The clatter of silverware against china filled the grand ballroom, a stark contrast to the hollowness growing inside me. Jalen, my son, stood at the head table, microphone in hand, his voice echoing through the space. I owe everything to the unwavering support of Meredith's incredible family, he announced, beaming at Julian's parents seated beside him. They welcomed me with open arms, and without them, this day wouldn't be possible. He gestured to Julian's parents, then to Meredith, his new bride. My smile faltered. He hadn't even glanced my way. To the Barringtons, Jalen raised his glass, and the room erupted in cheers. I took a sip of water, the crystal rim cool against my trembling lips. Was I invisible? The meal progressed, course after course, but the food felt like ash in my mouth. I watched Jalen and Meredith circulate, accepting congratulations, basking in the glow of their new life together. Meredith's mother, Beatrice, approached me, her smile strained. "Such a lovely wedding," she said, her voice a touch too loud. "Everything Julian's parents envisioned. It is beautiful," I replied, forcing a smile. "Meredith is so lucky to have such supportive in-laws," Beatrice continued, her eyes flitting towards Julian's parents. "They've been so generous, haven't they?" "They certainly have," I agreed, trying to keep my voice even. Beatrice patted my hand, a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. "It's such a blessing when families can come together like this," she said, her gaze pointedly excluding me. "It makes all the difference." She excused herself then, swept away by the tide of well-wishers surrounding Julian's parents. I excused myself from the table, needing a moment to breathe. The opulent ballroom felt suffocating, the joyous laughter echoing my own isolation. I stepped out onto a small balcony, the cool night air welcome relief. Below, the party continued, a swirling kaleidoscope of celebration. I looked up at the star-dusted sky, a wave of sadness washing over me. All those years, all the sacrifices I'd made for Jalen, and where was I now, relegated to the sidelines, a ghost at my own son's wedding? A quiet voice startled me. "Mrs. Morrill." I turned to see a young woman standing hesitantly near the balcony door. Her face was familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice soft. I wanted to thank you. I furrowed my brow. Thank me for what? For everything, she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. You were my teacher, remember, back in high school. Tenley Varnon, recognition dawned. Tenley, a bright, determined student who'd faced incredible hardships. I remembered her struggling to balance school with caring for her ailing grandmother. Tenley, of course. I remember you. It's wonderful to see you. What are you doing here? I'm a cater waiter tonight, she said, gesturing towards the ballroom. It's how I'm putting myself through college. That's wonderful. Tenley, I'm so proud of you. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, Mrs. Morrill, she insisted. You always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Her words warmed me, a small flicker of light in the darkness. You did all the hard work. Tenley, I just tried to give you a little push. It was more than a little push, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You helped me get a scholarship. You connected me with resources. You even helped me with my grandmother's medical bills. I remembered. It had been a difficult time for Tenley, and I'd done what I could to help. It was nothing, I said, dismissing her gratitude. It was everything, Tenley countered, and I'll never forget it. She paused, then added hesitantly, I know it's none of my business, Mrs. Morrill, but are you okay? Her concern touched me. I forced a smile, just a bit overwhelmed, I suppose. I understand, she said softly. Weddings can be a lot. She glanced back at the ballroom, then back at me. I should get back to work, she said, but I wanted you to know I'm here for you, Mrs. Morrill. Anything you need. Thank you, Tenley, I said, my voice choked with emotion. That means more than you know. She gave me a small smile and slipped back into the ballroom. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. Tenley's words, her genuine concern, had warmed a part of me that had grown cold. A thought began to take root, a tiny seed of defiance in the face of my isolation. Jalin might have forgotten my contributions. Meredith's family might have dismissed me, but I wasn't invisible. I still had the power to make a difference, to help those who truly deserved it. I thought about the trust fund my late husband had left, a sizable sum intended for Jalin's future. Suddenly, a new plan began to form in my mind, a plan that had nothing to do with weddings or family obligations, and everything to do with reclaiming my own sense of worth. The night air felt a little less cold, the stars a little brighter. I had a phone call to make. The clatter of cutlery against china had subsided, replaced by the murmur of satisfied guests and the tinkling of champagne flutes. I smoothed down my dress, a faint smile plastered on my face. Shall we gather for the family photos? Then Julian's mother, Beatrice, chirped. Her arm looped possessively through Meredith's. My smile faltered. No one looked my way. I watched, a knot tightening in my stomach, as Jalin's new in-laws, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even second cousins were ushered into position, a beaming Julian and Meredith at the center. The photographer, a stout man with a booming voice, fussed and rearranged, ensuring everyone was optimally placed. Still, no one acknowledged my presence. It was as though I were a ghost, hovering on the periphery of my own son's life. Jalin, darling, come stand next to your lovely bride, Beatrice trilled, her eyes glittering with what I could only interpret as malicious glee. Jalin, bless his oblivious heart, simply grinned and obeyed. He hadn't even noticed my absence. He was caught up in the whirlwind of the day, lost in the newness of his marriage, of his new family. And me, I was fading into the background. A wave of nausea washed over me. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing fresh air, and slipped away from the boisterous gathering. The cool night air was a welcome balm against the suffocating atmosphere of the reception hall. I wandered through the meticulously manicured gardens, the scent of roses heavy in the air, each carefully placed bloom, each perfectly trimmed hedge, seemed to mock my own disheveled state. I felt like a weed amidst a field of prize-winning flowers. "Mrs. Morrill," a soft voice called out. I turned to see a young woman, her face vaguely familiar, approaching me hesitantly. "It's Tenley," she said, her eyes widening in recognition. "Tenley Varnon, from your history class. A few years back." A flicker of warmth ignited within me. Tenley, a bright, inquisitive student, always eager to learn, always asking insightful questions. "Tenley, of course," I said, forcing a genuine smile this time. "It's wonderful to see you. What brings you here?" "Oh, I'm catering tonight," she confessed, her cheeks flushing slightly, "trying to make ends meet." She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the hem of her apron. My heart ached for her. Tenley had always dreamed of going to university, of becoming a teacher herself. But life, it seemed, had other plans for her. "And how are things going?" I asked gently, already sensing the answer. She sighed, a world of weariness in the sound. "Not great, Mrs. Morrow. My mom's been sick, and medical bills are piling up. I had to defer my studies to help out, just trying to keep our heads above water. You know, I knew all too well the crushing weight of responsibility, the feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond your control. As I looked at Tenley, I saw a reflection of my younger self, struggling to make ends meet, sacrificing my own dreams for the sake of family. A thought began to take shape in my mind, a small seed of defiance blossoming in the barren landscape of my heart. "Tenley," I said, a sudden resolve hardening my voice. "There might be something I can do to help." I thought of the trust fund Richard, my late husband, had set up years ago, a sizable sum, meant to secure Jalen's future, a future he now seemed determined to build without me. "It's a long shot," I continued, "but there's a possibility I could access some funds. It's complicated, but I'll look into it. Don't give up hope, all right." Tenley's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope flickering within them. "Mrs. Morrill, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I replied, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "Just let me see what I can do." I excused myself again, a newfound energy propelling me back towards the reception hall. The music seemed louder now, the laughter more grating. I saw Julian and Meredith twirling on the dance floor, oblivious to my presence, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. The photographer was packing up his equipment, his task complete. The family photos, a testament to their unity, their bond, a bond that I was no longer a part of. I walked towards the bar, ignoring the curious glances cast my way. "Whiskey, neat," I told the bartender, my voice steady and clear. As I sipped the burning liquid, I watched the festivities continue. the celebration of a new beginning, a new family. And as I watched, I knew that I too was on the cusp of a beginning that had nothing to do with them, a beginning that was entirely my own. The sting of their rejection still lingered, a dull ache in my chest. But beneath that ache, something else was stirring, a quiet strength, a steely resolve. I had spent my life pouring my love and energy into my family, only to be cast aside like an unwanted relic. But no more. I would reclaim my life, my agency, my future. And they, Jalan, Meredith, and their entire clan would never see it coming. The clinking of champagne flutes filled the air, a celebratory soundtrack to my growing unease. Meredith, radiant in her wedding gown, leaned into the microphone, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "I'm so lucky to have found such a wonderful man in Julian," she said, her eyes sparkling, "and to be welcomed into such a warm and loving family." She glanced towards Julian's parents, beaming, then to her own, their faces brimming with pride. My smile felt brittle. "I've always dreamed of a big, close family," Meredith continued, oblivious to the way my heart sank with each word. "And now, finally, I have one." A polite smattering of applause followed. Jalan, my son, squeezed my hand. "She's happy, Mom," he murmured. "Aren't you happy for us?" "Of course, dear," I replied, forcing a wider smile. But inside, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Her words, though seemingly innocent, felt like a pointed exclusion, a subtle reminder that I was not part of this big, close family she now embraced. The speeches continued, each toast a celebration of Julian's family, their history, their inside jokes. I listened politely, sipping my champagne, the bubbly liquid doing little to quench the rising tide of loneliness. Jalan, caught up in the festivities, barely glanced my way. He was engrossed in conversations with Julian's relatives, laughing at their stories, effortlessly fitting in. It was a joy to see him happy, of course, but a part of me ached with a quiet grief, a sense of being slowly, gently erased. A waiter offered me another glass of champagne. "Thank you," I said, accepting the refill. The cool glass felt comforting in my hand. I watched as Meredith twirled on the dance floor with her father, her laughter echoing through the room. My own memories of Jalan's childhood flickered before my eyes. His first wobbly steps, his gap-toothed grin, his graduation day. I had been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every late-night study session. Now, it felt like those memories were fading, overshadowed by the new family he was building. "You look pensive." Calvera, Julian's mother, Patricia, stood beside me, a knowing smile on her face. "Just taking it all in," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Such a beautiful wedding." "Yes, it is," Patricia agreed. "Meredith is a lovely girl. She'll make a wonderful addition to our family." The emphasis on her was subtle, but not lost on me. "They're very happy," I said, nodding towards the dance floor where Jalan and Meredith were now swaying to a slow song. Patricia patted my arm. "He's a lucky boy to have found her, and she's lucky to have found such a strong family." She paused, her smile widening. "We've always been very close, you know. Holidays, birthdays, we always do everything together." Her words struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a subtle exclusion anymore. It was a clear demarcation, a line drawn in the sand. I was outside the circle, looking in. "That's wonderful," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Family is everything." "Absolutely," Patricia agreed. "And we're so glad to have Jalan as part of ours now." The music swelled, and Julian's father took the microphone. He began to speak about the importance of family, about the strength of their bond. He spoke of traditions passed down through generations, of shared memories and unwavering support. My throat tightened, and I excused myself, slipping away from the crowded ballroom. The cool night air was a welcome relief against my flushed skin. I walked towards the gardens, seeking solace in the quiet darkness. The faint strains of music followed me, a constant reminder of the celebration I was no longer a part of. I sat on a stone bench, the cool marble seeping through my silk dress. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. This wasn't the time for tears. This was the time for something else entirely. A quiet resolve began to settle within me, a sense of purpose emerging from the ashes of my hurt. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the night air. There were other ways to find happiness, other ways to create a legacy. I thought of a conversation I'd had weeks ago, a chance encounter with a former student struggling to make ends meet. Tenley, a bright, ambitious girl with a mountain of student debt. She'd confided in me about her dreams, about her desire to start her own business. At the time, I'd offered words of encouragement, but little else. Now a new possibility began to take shape in my mind, a way to reclaim my agency, to create something meaningful out of this pain. The image of a forgotten document flashed through my mind, a dusty file tucked away in the back of my husband's desk. A trust fund, established years ago, meant for well. I hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now the memory felt like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. The music from the ballroom faded into the background, replaced by a new soundtrack. The quiet hum of a plan taking root. The knot in my stomach began to loosen, replaced by a flicker of anticipation. There were other families to build, other legacies to create, and I knew exactly where to start. The clatter of cutlery against china, the forced laughter echoing around the opulent ballroom, it all felt miles away. My son, Jalan, stood across the room, chatting animatedly with Julian's parents. His bow tie, I noticed, was slightly askew, a small, insignificant detail, yet it pricked at me like a splinter. How many times had I straightened that very same bow tie for him over the years? School dances, graduations, job interviews, each adjustment a silent affirmation of my love, my presence, my role in his life. Now here he was, radiant with happiness, and I felt like a ghost. Meredith, radiant in her shimmering gown, touched his arm lightly. "Darling," she said, her voice like tinkling bells, "Uncle Jeffrey wants to introduce you to someone." Jalan beamed, and without a backward glance, followed his new wife into the throng. I took a sip of the lukewarm champagne, the bubbles feeling strangely flat. "You all right?" "Calvera," a voice asked. It was Aunt Millie, Jalan's great-aunt. Bless her heart. "Just a bit tired," I lied, offering a weak smile. Aunt Millie patted my hand. "It's a long day," she agreed. her gaze following Jalan. "He's a fine young man. You must be so proud. Pride, yes, but also a gnawing emptiness. I managed, the words catching in my throat. He always was a good boy." I watched as Jalan navigated the room, effortlessly charming Julian's relatives and business associates. He'd always been unnatural, a social butterfly. Even as a shy, awkward child, he had a way of drawing people in. I remembered him at his fifth-grade talent show, reciting a poem he'd written about a lost puppy. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes shone with such conviction, such earnestness, that the entire auditorium was captivated. That night I'd held him close, whispering how proud I was. Tonight, I felt a world away. "He's really taken to your side, the family, hasn't he?" I said to Aunt Millie, trying to keep my voice light. She chuckled. "Well, they're a good bunch, aren't they? And Julian's parents are just so thrilled to have him join their firm." Julian's firm. Another subtle reminder of the life Jalan was building, a life I seemed to be increasingly excluded from. The wedding, the reception, the entire weekend had felt orchestrated, perfectly planned, impeccably executed, and yet I felt like an extra, a bit player in a production I hadn't auditioned for. "He's found his place," I murmured, more to myself than to Aunt Millie. She nodded, misinterpreting my quiet reflection as agreement. "Indeed, he's a lucky young man. Lucky, yes, he was. He had Meredith, a loving wife, a supportive family, a promising career. And I had memories, boxes full of photographs, school reports, hand-drawn birthday cards, a lifetime of love and devotion, now reduced to a polite smile and a pat on the hand." The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to fill the dance floor. Jalan swept Meredith into his arms, their laughter echoing above the music. They looked so happy, so in sync, their bodies moving together as if they were two halves of the same whole. A pang of longing, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. I wanted to share in their joy, to celebrate their love, but a chasm seemed to have opened between us, a chasm I wasn't sure how to bridge. I excused myself from Aunt Millie and slipped away unnoticed, seeking refuge in the quiet solitude of the ladies' room. The cool air against my skin was a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the ballroom. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. A stranger looked back at me, her eyes tired, her smile strained. Where was the vibrant, energetic woman who had raised Jalan, who had poured her heart and soul into creating a loving home for him? Where was the mother who had dreamed of sharing this special day with her son, of dancing with him at his wedding, of whispering words of wisdom and love into his ear? "He's gone," I whispered to my reflection, the words barely audible above the hum of the hand dryer. "He's really gone. Not gone in the literal sense, of course. He was just across the hall, surrounded by people who claimed him as their own. But the son I knew, the boy who had looked to me for guidance, for comfort, for love, that son seemed to have vanished, replaced by a man I barely recognized." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. It was time to face the truth. Jalan had moved on. He had built a new life, a life that didn't seem to have much room for me, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was okay. A strange calm settled over me, a quiet resolve I hadn't felt all evening. I dried my hands, smoothed down my dress, and walked back out into the ballroom, a faint glimmer of something akin to anticipation flickering within me. There was a life I had put on hold, a life that existed beyond the confines of motherhood, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to reclaim it. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Back in my quiet house, the echoes of the wedding reception felt a million miles away. I sat at the kitchen table, the glossy wedding program still clutched in my hand, a stark reminder of the day's events. Scattered around it were receipts, not for flowers or the cake, but for the venue deposit, the caterer's invoice, even the photographer's retainer, each one signed with a flourish. Charles Beaumont, Meredith's father. Jalon never asked me for a cent. I murmured to the empty room, my voice barely a whisper. Not that he needed to. I knew I'd offered, readily and repeatedly, ever since he and Meredith announced their engagement. "Mom, we've got it covered," Jalon had said, his smile easy, his hand squeezing my shoulder. "Don't you worry about a thing." Covered, indeed. Mr. Beaumont had covered everything. I picked up the caterer's receipt, the hefty sum printed at the bottom making my stomach churn. It was more than I'd earned in 3 months, more than I'd saved in a year. I remembered the tight budgets, the scrimping and saving I'd done to ensure Jalon had everything he needed, everything he wanted. The piano lessons he'd begged for, the summer camp that stretched our finances thin, the college fund I painstakingly built, penny by penny. Every sacrifice, I whispered, a bitter taste rising in my throat. Every single one. I remembered the worn-out shoes I'd refused to replace, the vacations we never took, the small indulgences I'd denied myself so that Jalon could have the best. He'd always been such a grateful child, quick with a hug, a heartfelt "thank you, Mom." He'd always understood the sacrifices, the quiet efforts I'd made to give him a life filled with opportunities. Or so I thought. Had he forgotten all of it? Or worse, had he simply dismissed it, overshadowed by Mr. Beaumont's extravagant gestures? The thought stung, a sharp, unexpected pain that settled deep in my chest. I traced the outline of Jalon's childhood photo, tucked into the corner of a framed picture of the two of us. He was beaming, gap-toothed and freckled, clutching a baseball bat almost as tall as himself. "You were my whole world," I whispered to the image, my voice thick with emotion. Pushing the receipts aside, I opened the worn photo album, its pages filled with snapshots of Jalon's life. First steps, first day of school, graduation, his beaming face as he received his diploma. Each photo a testament to the years I'd poured into nurturing him, guiding him, loving him unconditionally. Now, looking at these images, a wave of loneliness washed over me. I felt like a ghost, fading from his life, replaced by the glittering world of the Beaumonts. At the reception, they had held court, radiating wealth and influence. Meredith's mother, draped in diamonds, had barely acknowledged my presence. "Such a lovely wedding, Calvera," she'd said, her tone condescending, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "So glad you could make it. Make it. It was my son's wedding. I'd been there from the moment he took his first breath, through every milestone, every triumph, every heartbreak. And now, I felt like an outsider, a spectator in his own life. The wedding itself had been a lavish affair, a testament to the Beaumonts' seemingly endless resources. I'd watched from a distance as Jalan danced with Meredith, their faces radiant with happiness. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with love. It should have been a moment of pure joy, of maternal pride. Yet, a nagging emptiness persisted, a feeling of being adrift, disconnected. The rain continued to fall, the rhythmic drumming against the window a mournful soundtrack to my thoughts. I closed the photo album, the images of Jalan's childhood blurring through my tears. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, startling me. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the storm-swept street. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the wind howled like a banshee. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a quiet resolve amidst the turmoil. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't disappear. I wouldn't fade away. I had loved and sacrificed too much to simply be erased. There had to be another way, a way to reclaim my place, my purpose. And in the quiet stillness of that stormy night, I started to see a glimmer of possibility, a flicker of hope in the darkness. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, my hand reaching for a small, unassuming box. Inside, nestled amongst old letters and forgotten trinkets, lay a document I hadn't looked at in years. A document that held the key to my future, the key to my revenge. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the turmoil inside me. Julian's dismissive mother moral still echoed in my ears, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd always offered Meredith and him. I wandered through the silent house, the remnants of pre-wedding preparations now mocking reminders of my misplaced hope for a closer family. Upstairs, I found myself drawn to Frederick's old study, a room I rarely entered since his passing. The scent of old books and pipe tobacco still lingered, a ghost of his presence. I ran my hand along the polished wood of his desk, my fingers tracing the grooves he'd worn over years of work. He would have known what to do, I whispered, a tear tracing a path through the dust. My gaze fell upon a small, locked drawer I'd never noticed before. Curiosity, a flicker in the darkness, propelled me to search for the key. After several fruitless minutes searching, I finally located a small, ornate key tucked away in a jewelry box Frederick had gifted me years ago. "You never know when you might need it," he'd said with a wink. I slid the key into the lock, the mechanism clicking softly as the drawer popped open. Inside, nestled amongst old letters and photographs, was a thick manila envelope. My heart pounded as I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly. The envelope was marked simply "Trust." A wave of confusion washed over me. Frederick had never mentioned a trust. I sank into his old leather chair, the weight of the envelope heavy in my hands. With a deep breath, I tore open the seal and unfolded the documents within. The legalese swam before my eyes at first, but as I focused, the words began to take shape, forming a picture I couldn't quite comprehend. The Frederick Morrow Family Trust. The heading proclaimed, "A trust fund for Jalan." But there was more. A clause, tucked away almost as an afterthought, caught my attention. Distribution of the aforementioned assets shall be at the sole discretion of Calvera Morrow. contingent upon the demonstrated familial bond between Jalan Morrill and his mother. I read the clause again, and then again, each time the words sinking in a little deeper. $760,000. That was the sum. A staggering amount. And it was mine to control. Frederick's words echoed in my mind. Look after yourself, Culvera. Never forget your own worth. He'd known. He'd anticipated this. He'd provided for me, even in death, a way to protect myself from the very hurt he knew I was capable of enduring. He knew me so well, I murmured, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. But this time, the grief was mingled with a strange sense of empowerment. This trust, this unexpected gift, was more than just money. It was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim my own narrative. My mind raced, considering the implications. Jalan and Meredith were expecting a substantial inheritance, a foundation upon which to build their future. Julian's family, I knew, had already factored this into their own plans, their condescending smiles now taking on a new, sickeningly sweet quality in my memory. They saw me as a fading figure, a sentimental old woman soon to be shuffled off to the side. They thought they had won. They thought wrong, I whispered, a flicker of steel entering my voice. The rain outside had subsided, and a sliver of moonlight peeked through the clouds, illuminating the room in a soft, ethereal glow. I closed my eyes, Frederick's face appearing before me, his kind eyes filled with understanding. "What would you do, Frederick?" I asked the empty room. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken answers. I thought of Tenley Varnon, a bright young woman I'd taught years ago. Her family had fallen on hard times, forcing her to abandon her dreams of attending university. She'd written to me a few months back, detailing her struggles to make ends meet, her hopes of returning to school one day. Her words, filled with quiet desperation and unwavering determination, had stayed with me. I'd wanted to help, but my own resources were limited. Now I had a chance. I opened my eyes, the room no longer feeling like a tomb but a sanctuary. The trust documents felt lighter in my hands, no longer a burden but a tool for justice, a tool for good. I reached for the phone, my fingers dialing Tenley's number with a newfound sense of purpose. The ringing tone filled the silence, each beep echoing the promise of a different future, a future where kindness and generosity triumphed over indifference and greed, a future where I, Culvera Morrill, would write my own story. The phone clicked, and a hesitant voice answered on the other end. "Hello." It was Tenley. "Tenley," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's Culvera Morrill. I have some good news for you." Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, painting stripes across the worn Persian rug. Even the cheerful morning couldn't dispel the chill that had settled over me. "They really did seat me at the children's table," I murmured to the empty room, the sting of the previous night still fresh. I poured myself a cup of the strong, black coffee I needed to face the day after my son's wedding, a wedding where I felt more like a ghost than the groom's mother. "Jalan will call later, I suppose," I thought, picking up a stray piece of confetti from the breakfast table. "He'll explain it all away. Something about limited seating, a last-minute change." I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness a perfect echo of my mood. Or maybe Meredith's mother insisted. Perhaps it was Julian's idea. I shook my head, No matter the reason, the message was clear. I wasn't truly part of their family. I wandered into the study, the room still cluttered with boxes from Jalen's recent move. He barely took anything. I muttered, running a hand over a dusty baseball trophy. So many memories packed away, discarded like yesterday's news. A half-empty box labeled Dad's papers caught my eye. My late husband, George. He would have known what to say, how to comfort me. You'd be shaking your head at all this, wouldn't you, George? I asked the quiet room, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. I knelt down and began sifting through the documents, mostly old bills and insurance policies. Then, at the very bottom, beneath a stack of faded photographs, I found it. A thick, official-looking envelope. The Morrow Family Trust. It read in bold lettering. My heart skipped a beat. I knew about this trust. George had mentioned it years ago, a nest egg he'd set aside for Jalen. But he'd never told me the details. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were pages of legal jargon, names, and figures. My eyes widened as I skimmed the document. $760,000. $760,000. George had left a significant sum, a sum intended for Jalen's future, and much to my surprise, I was named as the trustee, with full discretion over its distribution. A strange calm washed over me, the sting of the previous night, the feeling of being sidelined. It all began to recede. This changed everything. This gave me options. They think they can just push me aside, I whispered, a new resolve hardening my voice. They think they can treat me like I'm invisible. I stood up, clutching the document to my chest. Well, they're about to learn that I'm not. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I glanced at the caller ID. Jalen. I let it ring, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Not now, I muttered. Not yet. I had something more important to do. I needed to think, to plan. This money, it was meant for Jalen, yes. But perhaps, just perhaps, it could serve a different purpose. A purpose that would remind everyone, especially Jalen and his new family, that I mattered. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the bitterness now replaced by a strange, almost exhilarating taste. My mind raced, sifting through possibilities. Then, a name surfaced from the recesses of my memory. Tenley Varnon, a bright, determined young woman I'd taught years ago. She'd had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, but her family's financial struggles had forced her to put those dreams on hold. Last I'd heard, she was working multiple jobs, barely making ends meet. Tenley, I said aloud, a small smile playing on my lips. Yes, Tenley. I remembered her infectious enthusiasm, her unwavering dedication. She deserved a chance that life had cruelly denied her, and now I had the power to give it to her. This money could change her life, I murmured, a feeling of warmth spreading through me. It wouldn't be the revenge some might seek, the kind that leaves everyone scorched. This would be different. This would be a quiet act of defiance, a way of reclaiming my own power, of showing them that I wasn't just a forgotten face at the wedding table. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of a local attorney, a woman I'd met at a charity event years ago. Hello, Sarah. It's called Vera Morrow. I need your help with something rather important. I paused, a sense of anticipation bubbling in my chest. It's about a trust fund and a young woman who deserves a second chance. The morning sun seemed to shine a little brighter, the stripes across the rug a little bolder. The chill that had settled over me finally began to melt away, replaced by a sense of purpose, a sense of quiet, unwavering resolve. The wedding, the slight, the children's table, it all seemed so distant now, so insignificant. I had a plan, and I knew exactly how to execute it. Rain lashed against the window pane, blurring the city lights into hazy halos. I dialed Matilda's number, my hand surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within me. "Matilda, it's Culvera," I said, my voice catching slightly. "I need to make some changes to a trust." There was a rustle of papers on the other end of the line. "Of course, Culvera. Which trust are we talking about?" Matilda's voice was calm and professional, the kind of voice that had always steadied me through difficult times. "The Moral Family Trust," I replied, the name heavy on my tongue. It was the trust my late husband, Charles, had established years ago, intended for originally for Jalon and his future family. A silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken understanding. Matilda knew my history, the subtle exclusions, the growing distance between me and Jalon since Meredith had entered the picture. She knew about the wedding, how I'd been seated at the far end of the table, practically amongst strangers. "I understand," Matilda finally said softly. "What changes do you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. This was it. "I want to change the beneficiary," I declared, a new sense of purpose hardening my voice. "The entire amount. I want it to go to someone else." Another rustle of papers, followed by a thoughtful pause. "And who is the new beneficiary?" "Culvera," Matilda inquired, her tone neutral. I thought of Tenley Varnon, the bright, determined young woman I'd taught years ago. She was struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs while pursuing her dream of opening a community bakery. A small smile touched my lips. "Her name is Tenley Varnon," I said firmly. "I'll give you her details." Matilda's voice was brisk and efficient as she took down Tenley's information. We discussed the legalities, the paperwork, the timeline. She reassured me that everything could be handled discreetly and expeditiously. "Culvera, are you sure about this?" Matilda asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "This is a significant amount of money." "I am absolutely certain," I replied without hesitation. This money was meant to secure a future, and right now, I believe Tenley needs it more than anyone else. The rain continued to batter the window, a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. I could almost hear the gears turning in Matilda's mind. She was a meticulous lawyer, always careful to ensure her clients understood the full implications of their actions. "Very well, Culvera. I'll draft the necessary documents and send them over for your signature." A wave of relief washed over me. It was done. I had taken the first concrete step towards reclaiming my life, towards redirecting the flow of my future. "Thank you, Matilda. You've been a lifesaver. Just doing my job." "Culvera," she replied warmly. We ended the call, and I sat in the stillness of my apartment, listening to the rain. The city lights no longer seemed blurred. They shimmered with a newfound clarity. This was a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the narrative of my life, a chance to make a real difference in someone else's. I thought of Tenley, her infectious enthusiasm, her unwavering belief in her dreams. This money wouldn't just change her life. It would empower her to build something beautiful, something meaningful. It was an investment in a future far brighter than the one I had envisioned for myself just days ago. I reached for my phone again, this time scrolling through old photos. I paused on a picture of Tenley, beaming at her high school graduation, her diploma clutched tightly in her hand. She had written me a thank you note back then, a heartfelt message expressing her gratitude for my guidance and encouragement. I still had it tucked away in a memory box, a testament to the impact a teacher can have on a student's life. Now, I had a chance to make an even greater impact, to provide her with the resources she needed to flourish. A small, satisfied smile played on my lips. Jalon and Meredith may have pushed me to the periphery, but I had found my own center, my own way to create a legacy. The rain had stopped, and the city lights shone brilliantly through the clear glass, reflecting the quiet strength I now felt within me. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Matilda's office felt strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had been brewing inside me for months. Julian and Meredith's wedding had been a beautiful affair, undeniably, but the undercurrent of exclusion, the subtle nudges to the periphery of my own son's celebration, had left a wound deeper than any apology could heal. So Matilda began, her voice calm and reassuring. Everything is in order. The trust is valid. And you, as the surviving spouse, have full authority to change the beneficiary. I exhaled slowly, a knot in my stomach finally loosening. That's a relief, I admitted, my voice still trembling slightly. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, I hadn't even known this trust existed. My late husband, bless his secretive heart, had tucked it away, a silent promise for a future he wouldn't see. He always did like surprises, I murmured, a faint smile playing on my lips. Matilda chuckled softly. It certainly is a significant one. $760,000 is a life-changing sum, and it would be, just not for whom he'd originally intended. Originally, the trust was meant for Jalon, a safety net for his future. But after the wedding, after witnessing the way Julian's family treated me, after feeling myself slowly erased from my son's new life, something shifted. I couldn't bring myself to hand over that money, not to a family who seemed to view me as an afterthought. I'm absolutely certain about this, I told Matilda, my voice firm now, the last vestiges of doubt melting away. I want to name Tenley Varnon as the new beneficiary. Matilda raised an eyebrow slightly. Tenley Varnon, is she a relative? I shook my head. No, she's a former student of mine. A bright girl, incredibly talented, but struggling financially. She's working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, putting herself through night school. This money will give her a chance I knew she deserved, a chance my own son, surrounded by his new family's considerable wealth, no longer needed. Matilda nodded, her expression professional. Very well. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork. Just sign here, and here as I sign my name. A sense of quiet satisfaction washed over me. This wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no tearful apologies. But this was reclamation. I was taking back my power, my agency, the right to decide where my husband's legacy would go. It wouldn't fix the hurt, the sting of being sidelined at my own son's wedding. But it was a start. It was a statement. And somehow, that was enough. I left Matilda's office, stepping back into the bustling city streets, a new lightness in my step. I hadn't told Jalin about the trust. Not yet. I wondered how he would react when he found out, when he realized that the safety net his father had woven for him had been rewoven, its threads now supporting someone else's dreams, someone who I knew would appreciate it, cherish it, and use it to build a life filled with the kind of warmth and inclusivity that had been so conspicuously absent at my son's wedding. The thought warmed me more than any celebratory toast ever could. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I signed my name, Calvera Morrill, one last time, a firm stroke that finalized the transfer. The weight of the pen felt heavier than usual, symbolic of the weight I'd been carrying for months. Ever since Meredith and Julian's wedding, a gnawing emptiness had settled in my chest. "We'll have to squeeze you in somewhere," Julian's mother had chirped, waving dismissively toward a side table far from the main celebration. That casual disregard, that subtle exclusion, had been the catalyst. It was a culmination, really, of small slights and whispered conversations that made it clear where I stood. On the periphery of my own son's life, the trust fund, a hefty sum of $760,000 established by my late husband, had initially been intended for Jalin and Meredith to use as a down payment on a house. Now, the beneficiary line read Tenley Varnon, a name that brought a faint smile to my lips. Tenley had been a student in my history class years ago, a bright, determined young woman whose passion for learning shone through her quiet demeanor. I'd followed her progress through college, celebrating her small victories from afar. A few months ago, I'd run into her at the grocery store. "Mrs. Morrill," she'd asked tentatively, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "It's Tenley Varnon, from your 11th grade history class." We chatted for a while, catching up on her life, her aspiration of opening a small bakery, her current struggles working multiple jobs to make ends meet. "It's tough out there," she'd admitted, her voice laced with a weary resignation that resonated with my own quiet battle. That conversation had planted a seed. Why should money meant for a family who barely acknowledged my existence sit untouched, while someone deserving struggled to realize their dreams? I'd always believed in helping others, in lifting up those who strive to make a difference. Jalin and Meredith, with their lavish wedding and their casual disregard for my feelings, clearly didn't need my help. They seemed to have everything they wanted, a life built on a foundation that didn't seem to have room for me. The signed documents sat on my desk, stark and final. I carefully placed them in an envelope addressed to my lawyer. It was done. The trust was Tenley's. I imagined her face when she received the news. The shock, the disbelief, the joy that would undoubtedly follow. It wouldn't be just financial security for her. It would be a chance to create something meaningful, to build a future she deserved. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth spreading through my hands. A strange sense of peace settled over me, a feeling of reclaiming something I thought I'd lost. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about agency, about using what I had to make a positive impact in the world, even if it was a small one. It was about choosing to invest in a future where my actions mattered, where my presence was felt, where I wasn't relegated to the sidelines. My phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. It was Jalin. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Meredith and I have been thinking about the house. We found one we really love, and we were wondering," if he paused, his voice hesitant, "if we could access the trust fund now to help with the down payment." I took a slow sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through me. "Jalin," I said, my voice calm and steady, "there's been a slight change of plans." He was silent for a moment, the silence stretching thin and taut. "What do you mean?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with a nervous energy I hadn't heard before. "Well," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I've decided to redirect the funds. I felt they could be put to better use." The silence on the other end deepened, pregnant with unspoken questions. "Better use," he finally echoed, his voice rising slightly. "What could possibly be a better use than helping your own son, helping someone who appreciates it?" I replied, my voice soft but firm. "Someone who understands the value of a helping hand, someone who is working hard to build a future for themselves." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I'll be sending you the details soon. I'm sure you'll understand eventually." I ended the call before he could respond, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, painting the walls with hues of orange and gold. I stood by the window, watching the day fade, a new sense of purpose filling the emptiness that had been there for so long. The trust fund was gone, but something far more valuable had taken its place. The knowledge that I had made a difference. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that my actions had created ripples of hope and opportunity in the world. And that, I realized, was a reward far greater than any revenge. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sipped my tea, the porcelain warm against my fingers. It was quiet now, the house still holding the echo of laughter and conversation from Tenley's visit. "I can't thank you enough, Mrs. Morrill," she had said, her eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "This changes everything." I smiled, remembering the genuine joy in her voice when I'd explained the terms of the trust. It wasn't just about the money, although that certainly alleviated her immediate concerns about her mother's medical bills. It was about the opportunity, the chance to pursue her dreams without the crushing weight of financial worry. "You deserve it, Tenley," I'd replied. "You always have." It felt right. This quiet act of defiance, of reclaiming something that felt stolen from me, not materially, but emotionally. Jalin and Meredith hadn't actively taken anything from me, not in the traditional sense, but their subtle exclusions, the whispered conversations that ceased when I entered the room, the way Meredith's family seemed to form an impenetrable circle. Leaving me on the periphery, it all chipped away at my sense of belonging. "We're just so happy you could be here, Mom," Jalin had said at the wedding, his hand briefly squeezing my shoulder. before he was swept away by Julian's boisterous family. His words were kind, but his actions spoke a different language. I hadn't realized how much their behavior had affected me until the day after the wedding, when I found myself staring at old photos of Jalan as a boy. He'd always been such a sensitive child, fiercely protective of those he loved. Seeing his younger self, full of innocent affection, made the current distance feel even more profound. "He'll come back," I whispered to the photograph, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. "He always does." But a small, insidious voice in the back of my mind whispered back, "Will he?" That was the turning point. The realization that I couldn't keep waiting for things to go back to the way they were. I had to create my own happiness, my own sense of purpose. And then, while sorting through old documents, I stumbled upon the paperwork for the trust fund, a forgotten relic of my late husband's foresight. He'd always believed in helping others, in investing in the future. "Use this wisely, Calvera," he'd said when he first told me about it. "It's not just about money. It's about making a difference." At the time, I'd thought he meant investing in Jalan's future. Now, I realized it meant something more. I thought of Tenley, a bright, determined young woman who'd been a student in my English class years ago. She'd faced hardship after hardship, yet never lost her optimism or her drive to succeed. She was working 2 jobs to support her ailing mother and still managed to volunteer at the local library. "Mrs. Morrill," she'd said to me just a few weeks ago when we ran into each other at the grocery store, "I'm applying for a scholarship to study abroad. It's a long shot, but it's my dream." I remembered the flicker of hope in her eyes, quickly shadowed by a veil of resignation. "It's a lot of money," she added softly. The idea came to me then, a whisper in the quiet of my own heart. I could use the trust fund to help Tenley. It wouldn't be the traditional inheritance Jalan might have expected, but it would be a legacy nonetheless. A legacy of kindness, of empowerment, of making a real difference in someone's life. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Morrill?" my lawyer had asked. His brow furrowed. "It's a significant sum." "I am," I'd replied firmly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Now, sitting in the quiet of my home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't about revenge, not in the malicious sense. It was about reclaiming my agency, about choosing to invest in a future that felt meaningful to me. The trust fund was more than just money. It was a symbol of my own independence, my own ability to shape the world around me. I didn't know how Jalan and Meredith would react when they eventually found out. Perhaps they wouldn't understand. Perhaps they'd be angry. But that was no longer my concern. I had made my choice, and I knew, with unwavering certainty, that it was the right one. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the room. I finished my tea, the warmth spreading through me. It was time to start a new chapter.